You've felt it, haven't you? The exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, the heaviness in your chest for no clear reason, the low hum of anxiety running through your body even when nothing is wrong. Your mind feels foggy. Your motivation slips through your fingers, and underneath it all, there's that quiet, persistent sense that something is shifting, that something is coming, but you can't quite name it. This isn't just stress. It isn't just burnout. What you're feeling is part of something much bigger. The world is moving through a massive shift in consciousness, a global energetic transition unlike anything humanity has experienced before. And if you're feeling it this intensely, it may be because you're not just a bystander. You may be one of the chosen souls, what some call light workers, grid workers, earth angels, even part of the prophesied 144,000 souls encoded to anchor light during times of chaos and to help guide this transition into higher awareness. But here's the part no one tells you: that role makes you a target. Forces that thrive on fear, division, and illusion do not waste time on those who pose no threat. They focus on the ones who carry influence, the ones who disrupt the old system simply by remembering who they are. If you've been feeling blocked, drained, or emotionally thrown off course for no clear reason, there may be a deeper pattern at play. In this video, you'll see how these energetic attacks operate on a psychological and frequency level, why fear and distraction are used against you, and how to protect your light so you can rise into your unstoppable self. But be warned, once you recognize these patterns and remember why you came here, your awareness will shift permanently, and nothing will be able to manipulate you the same way again. There is an idea older than religion, older than language, older even than the stories carved into stone, that humanity forgets in cycles, and in every age of forgetting, a small number arrive carrying memory. Not memory of events, but memory of origin. If something in your life has felt heavier than it should, as if you were born into a world that does not quite fit your shape, this idea may not feel abstract to you. It may feel personal. The ancients spoke in symbols about a time when darkness would thicken around the earth, not as punishment, not as the end, but as a necessary compression before awakening. They whispered of a turning point when a sealed group of souls would rise, not to dominate, not to rule, but to restore balance from within. In the book of Revelation, they were called the 144,000, not merely a statistic, not a literal headcount, but a living symbol, a code hidden inside myth. Redeemed from the earth, the text says. Sealed, distinct, hidden in plain sight, scattered quietly across the planet. Some recognize themselves early. Others spend years feeling different, displaced, sensing that they are waiting for something unnamed. Perhaps you have known that feeling. A quiet suspicion that your life is not random, that your sensitivity is not weakness, that your longing is not foolish. These souls, as the story goes, are not here to escape the world, but to anchor something within it, what many mystics later described as Christ consciousness, not as a figure outside of you, but as a frequency embodied, a way of perceiving that dissolves illusion. And if that is so, then resistance would be inevitable, because any structure built on forgetfulness trembles when remembrance enters the room. Across civilizations, the same warning appears in different language. The Egyptians spoke of Apep, the serpent of chaos that attacked the soul in the underworld, not to destroy it outright, but to disorient it during its passage through night. In the Vedic traditions, there are the Asuras, forces that distort perception and twist Dharma, not through brute strength, but through subtle deception. Early Gnostic writings named them archons, rulers of illusion, parasites of consciousness that thrive where awareness sleeps. Notice the pattern. These forces are never described as fearing strength alone. They fear awakening. They fear clarity. They fear the moment a human being realizes that the prison was largely perceptual. And so the myth continues. The Hopi speak of a purification, a fire that cleanses and renews. The Mayans foretold a reset of time and consciousness, not annihilation, but recalibration. Keepers of esoteric Christ teachings prepared quietly for a distant era when the children of light would return, not descending from the sky, but rising from within humanity itself. You are living in a time that echoes those prophecies. Look around: political instability, economic fragility, environmental upheaval, collective anxiety humming beneath daily life. It can look like collapse, it can feel like chaos, but what if it is the cracking of an outdated framework? What if what appears as breakdown is also birth? The old grid does not fall silently. When established systems lose control, they grow louder. Confusion increases, fear multiplies, narratives intensify. Yet underneath the noise, something subtle shifts. If you have felt pressure building inside you, as if your inner world is being rearranged without your consent, consider the possibility that you are responding to that shift. Not as a victim of it, but as part of it. The myth suggests that those who carry this inner code experience friction, a lifelong sense of being watched, tested, misunderstood, a heaviness that begins early, isolation that feels less like circumstance and more like initiation. Why would such souls encounter resistance? Because awakening rearranges the inner architecture you once relied on. A person who remembers their inner authority cannot be easily manipulated. A person who perceives beyond surface narratives cannot be easily contained. And here is the quiet reversal that few discuss openly. In many myths, opposition intensifies near transformation, just as pressure builds closest to breakthrough. If you have felt blocked at the edge of expansion, drained without visible cause, intercepted just as you begin to step into something larger, you may not be cursed. You may be crossing a threshold. The ancient texts were not necessarily describing monsters in the sky. They were mapping psychological and energetic dynamics in symbolic language. Apep may represent the surge of chaos that arises when you descend into your own unconscious. The archons may mirror intrusive thought patterns that mimic your own voice. The battlefield may not be out there at all. It may be perception itself. Imagine this not as dogma, but as a lens. When you move toward clarity, confusion can spike. When you commit to truth, old wounds resurface. When you prepare to create something meaningful, doubt grows louder. Is that punishment or resistance to change? The myth would say, resistance reveals importance. The 144,000, in symbolic terms, are not a privileged class. They are a reminder that awakening is embodied through individuals, through you. Not to dominate the world, but to transmute what weighs it down. And if that is even partially true, then your fatigue may not be random. It may be the strain of remembering in a culture built on forgetting. This is where the story deepens. Because once you begin to consider that possibility, the narrative of victimhood cracks, and when that crack appears, something inside you begins to stir. If the first crack in the story has appeared, if you can even entertain the possibility that your struggle is not meaningless but initiatory, then the next layer becomes unavoidable. Because once you begin to awaken, resistance does not always look like darkness. It becomes more refined, more psychological, more intimate. The ancient myths warned that the true battlefield would not be fought with visible weapons, but through perception, suggestion, and emotion. The war, if we can even call it that, unfolds inside the human nervous system. And this is where the language of demons becomes symbolic, not theatrical. These forces do not arrive with horns and fire. They arrive as thoughts that feel like your own. They whisper through memory. They amplify unhealed pain. They do not break the system. They corrupt the code. Have you noticed how, just as you begin healing, An old betrayal resurfaces with surprising intensity. A wound you believed was resolved suddenly pulses again. A memory you had neatly filed away returns with fresh emotion. It can feel almost strategic, almost timed. The mythic language would describe this as interception. Not because something external is punishing you, but because growth destabilizes old structures inside your psyche. Where there is unresolved trauma, distortion finds entry. Where there is shame, it builds a nest. Where there is fear, it grows louder. And for those symbolized as the 144,000, those described as carrying amplified sensitivity, this dynamic becomes even more pronounced. Sensitivity is a gift. It allows you to perceive subtle currents in people, in environments, in collective energy. But unguarded sensitivity can also become a doorway. Think of it this way. If you are wired to transmute emotional density, you must first feel it. You absorb more. You register shifts more quickly. You sense what others ignore. That same capacity makes you powerful, but it also means that anxiety without a clear source can attach itself to you. Sudden mood changes can feel invasive. Creative blocks can appear like fog rolling in without warning. The myth speaks of frequency. When your internal state lowers into despair or self-doubt, your perception narrows. You forget your broader view. You begin to question your worth. And once you question your light, the opposition no longer needs to push. You push yourself back into smaller spaces. This is not condemnation, it is pattern recognition. Isolation becomes another subtle mechanism. Many who resonate with this archetype report feeling alone long before they understand why. Friendships dissolve. Conversations feel surface level. You sense that you are walking between worlds, unable to fully belong to either. It can feel like exile. But exile in myth is rarely random. It is preparation. When external mirrors disappear, you are forced to meet your own reflection. And here is the paradox the old stories hint at. What was meant to weaken you can become the forge that strengthens you. Silence becomes initiation. Solitude becomes remembering. The wilderness becomes a classroom. Have you ever noticed that chaos often erupts at the exact moment you prepare to step forward? You decide to publish your work, and suddenly your confidence drops. You plan to speak honestly, and conflict arises. You align with your calling, and practical obstacles multiply. Health wavers, technology fails, finances tighten. It can look like bad luck, but through a mythic lens, it resembles backlash. Not cosmic punishment, but friction generated by expansion. Every system resists collapse, and if you are, symbolically speaking, a system breaker, then resistance is predictable. You were not shaped to preserve outdated patterns. You were shaped to disrupt them, to interrupt inherited trauma, to question false grids of belief, to rewrite scripts that have been running unconsciously for generations. This is why the myth insists that forces of distortion focus on those who are rising, not because they are special in an egoic sense, but because they are impactful. Power that remembers itself cannot be easily steered. But here is where the narrative becomes even more subtle. Not all resistance arrives cloaked in shadow. Some wear robes of light. Ancient Gnostic texts describe the archons not only as dark rulers but as imitators, mimicking truth to maintain control. And if you look carefully, you may recognize this pattern in your own experience. The teacher who encourages devotion but subtly discourages autonomy. The spiritual community that celebrates positivity while shaming authentic emotion. The doctrine that says love is everything, yet avoids confronting injustice or shadow. This is what mystics called false light. Not obvious evil, but inversion. A teaching that sounds elevated yet leaves you smaller. A path that promises transcendence while bypassing your humanity. Phrases like, just stay high vibration, or don't focus on the negative, can become tools of suppression if they are used to silence necessary shadow work. Love without discernment becomes naivety. Light without depth becomes fragile. Certainty offered too quickly can halt genuine inquiry. The ego is flattered, the soul remains hungry. And if you have ever felt guilty for struggling, ashamed for having doubts, praised only when you suppress inconvenient truths, you may have brushed against this inversion. But this is not failure, it is refinement. The archetype of the chosen one must learn discernment. You cannot recognize authentic light without encountering its imitation. You cannot embody wisdom without passing through confusion. The myth suggests that both darkness and false light are initiatory thresholds. They force you inward. They compel you to ask deeper questions. Does this path empower me or shrink me? Does this voice awaken my sovereignty or bind me to dependency? Does this teaching expand my awareness or numb it? When you begin asking such questions sincerely, deception weakens. Illusion requires unexamined belief. Awareness dissolves it. And so the war you were never meant to see becomes visible, not as a cosmic spectacle, but as the daily tension between truth and distortion within your own consciousness, between reactive emotion and grounded presence, between inherited narrative and inner knowing. The battlefield is intimate. It is your attention. It is your perception. And once you realize this, something shifts again, because you are no longer fighting monsters in the dark. You are reclaiming authorship of your inner world. The myth never intended to frighten you. It was meant to awaken responsibility. And if you are still listening, still leaning into this uncomfortable possibility, then something inside you is already choosing awareness over sleep. That choice changes everything. But awareness alone is not the end. It is the doorway. What you do with that awareness determines whether you remain entangled in the old grid or begin anchoring something entirely new. If awareness is the doorway, then remembrance is the crossing. Once you begin to see the patterns, once you recognize how perception can be bent, how emotion can be manipulated, how both darkness and false light can distort your center, the question becomes intimate and immediate. What do you do now in your actual life, in your body, in your breath? Because this is where the myth stops being a story about cosmic forces and becomes a mirror. Spiritual warfare, in its deepest sense, is not won by force. It is stabilized through frequency. And frequency, stripped of mystical language, is simply the quality of your presence, the steadiness of your awareness, the way you inhabit yourself. When was the last time you sat in silence without trying to fix anything? Not meditating to escape, not affirming to override pain, just sitting, noticing the texture of your own inner weather. The old teachings suggest that what distorts you most is not external attack, but disconnection from the present moment. Distortion feeds on unconscious reaction. It thrives in stories you never question. It amplifies emotions you refuse to feel fully. But when you pause and bring your full attention to now, something subtle happens. The noise loses authority. The thought that felt invasive becomes observable. The emotion that felt overwhelming becomes movable. In that space, you are no longer possessed by your experience. You are witnessing it, and witnessing is power. Ask yourself quietly, what am I carrying that does not belong to me? What belief did I inherit without examining? What fear repeats in my mind like a script that was handed down? These questions are not meant to accuse, they are meant to open space, because the myth of demons and archons can also be understood as inherited patterns of perception that perpetuate themselves through unawareness. When you look directly at them without flinching, they lose mystery. They shrink from monsters into mechanisms, and mechanisms can be dismantled. There is another inversion hidden in the old stories. Demons, it is said, do not fear your strength. They fear your stability. They fear when you stop reacting on command. when you no longer feed outrage compulsively, when you no longer spiral into self-doubt every time something challenges you, when you stop abandoning your intuition to maintain approval. Stability is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not need spectacle. It is the calm center that cannot be baited. And, in a world addicted to stimulation, such steadiness is radical. So instead of trying to elevate yourself above darkness, root yourself so deeply in awareness that nothing external can easily shake you. Walk through your life as if you remember where you came from, even if you cannot articulate it. Speak carefully, not to control others, but to honor your own integrity. Hold your energy as something sovereign, not in arrogance, but in responsibility. Each time you override your inner knowing to please someone else, you fracture that sovereignty. Each time you silence your truth to avoid discomfort, you widen that fracture. Over time, those small betrayals accumulate, and you begin to feel divided from yourself. The myth would call that possession. But perhaps it is simply chronic self-abandonment. This is why remembrance is the cure. Not remembrance of a past life story, not a dramatic revelation of destiny, but remembrance of your own center. The place inside you that knows when something feels aligned and when it does not. The place that senses expansion versus contraction. You do not need external validation to access it. You need honesty. Tell the truth, even when your voice trembles. Sit with discomfort instead of numbing it immediately. Choose alignment over applause. These are not grand gestures, they are daily revolutions. If your life has felt like a gauntlet of tests, consider another lens. In Egyptian myth, the soul's journey through the underworld was filled with trials, deceptions, fires that purified. In the Christ narrative, the desert temptation precedes the ministry. Betrayal precedes resurrection. These are not instructions to seek suffering. They are symbolic maps suggesting that before light stabilizes within a person, it is confronted by everything that could distort it. Some of your darkest seasons may not have been punishments. They may have been initiations, thresholds that required you to decide who you are when everything external is stripped away. The archetype of the 144,000 can be understood not as an exclusive club, but as a symbol of distributed awakening. Christ returning not as a single figure descending from the sky, but as consciousness awakening through many individuals who become immune to manipulation because they have faced their own shadow. When even one person stabilizes in that awareness, the collective field shifts slightly. When many do, the old grid begins to fracture. Not dramatically at first, quietly, through conversations, through choices, through integrity. You are not here to defeat demons in a theatrical sense. You are here to outgrow the patterns that once controlled you, to recognize illusion without becoming consumed by it, to walk through darkness without becoming it. Every time you resist the urge to react blindly, you anchor clarity. Every time you choose truth over comfort, you alter the field around you. This is not fantasy. It is psychological and energetic maturity expressed symbolically. Your exhaustion may not have been weakness. It may have been the weight of carrying awareness in an environment that rewards distraction. Your anxiety may not have been random malfunction. It may have been a signal that your system senses incongruence between what you are and what you have been told to be. If you are still listening, still questioning, still willing to look beneath the surface, then something within you is already remembering. And here is the final inversion. The battle is not about defeating an external enemy. It is about refusing to become divided within yourself. It is about reclaiming perception, about seeing through fear without denying its presence, about integrating shadow rather than projecting it outward. When you do this, manipulation loses its grip. You cannot be easily steered by narratives designed to provoke. You cannot be easily trapped by false certainty. your awareness changes permanently. So, stand quietly in that possibility. What would shift if you stopped apologizing for your depth, if you allowed your light to grow, even if it unsettled those comfortable with dimness? What patterns in your family line might end with you? What illusions might dissolve simply because you refused to participate? These are not small questions, they are thresholds. Power, in this sense, is not loud, it is perceptive. If the word chosen resonates, perhaps it points not to exclusion, but to responsibility. You are chosen in the sense that you chose to remember. And remembrance, once stabilized, cannot be undone. When you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. When you reclaim your center, manipulation cannot reach you in the same way. The world may still tremble, systems may still crack, but you will walk through it differently, not as prey, not as pawn, as presence. And presence, rooted deeply enough, becomes the quiet force that reshapes everything. Now, after walking through all of this, you may begin to sense that your tiredness was never empty, never meaningless. The heaviness you carried was not a flaw in you, and the anxiety that moved quietly beneath your days was not random noise. It was a signal in its own language, a subtle stirring within your awareness. Nothing you have felt has been wasted. The isolation, the questioning, the moments when you doubted your path, even the times you almost gave up, all of it fits into a pattern that is larger than any single chapter. You were never behind. You were never forgotten. You were never moving in the wrong direction. What felt like delay may have been preparation. What felt like confusion may have been the loosening of illusions. Every shadow you walked through did not erase your light. It revealed its shape. If the image of the 144,000 resonates with you, let it rest as a symbol, not a burden. A reminder that awakening does not happen in isolation, but through many hearts, remembering at once. As each person steadies within themselves, something subtle shifts in the shared field of this world. The old structures of fear and distortion do not need to be fought. They simply lose their grip when consciousness matures. There is no need to strain now, no need to prove anything. The process unfolding in you belongs to your season, and it is enough. You do not have to rush your becoming. You do not have to force your light. It is already present, already working quietly beneath the surface. And if something within you feels slightly clearer, slightly softer, slightly more grounded than before, that is enough for this moment. Let that awareness settle, let it breathe. The path continues gently from here, and there are more layers waiting to be uncovered when you are ready to step into them. As I reflect on everything we have just moved through together, what lingers for me is not fear, not drama, but a quiet recognition that many of us have been interpreting our inner storms too literally, too harshly, as if something were wrong with us, when perhaps something deeper was trying to wake us gently from the inside. I don't see this story as a rigid doctrine or a final answer, but as a mirror held up in low light, inviting you to notice the shapes that have always been there in your own life. Maybe the myths of archons and awakening are less about distant cosmic battles and more about the subtle turning points you have already lived through in silence. Maybe the idea of the 144,000 is not about separation, but about shared remembrance happening quietly across the world in ordinary people who are simply becoming more conscious. I'm curious what stirred in you as you listened. Did certain moments feel uncomfortably familiar? Did something soften, or resist, or awaken? Your perspective matters here, because this kind of exploration is never complete without lived experience. If any part of this resonated, you might share a single sentence in the comments that captures what stayed with you most. Even something simple like, "I am remembering," or "This felt personal." Reading each other's reflections creates a field where no one feels alone in their questioning. And if this space feels aligned with where you are in your journey, you can gently support it by liking the video and subscribing, so we can continue unfolding these layers together. What you felt tonight may not be accidental. It may be the beginning of a deeper conversation, one that includes you more than you realize.